Welcome to the Disruptor Network podcast.
Welcome back to the Disruptors Network podcast. We have a great show for you today with EC Synkowski. EC is the founder of Optimized Me Nutrition, which focuses on nutrition programs to take all the gimmicks out, just the facts. She's got a famous TED Talk where she actually introduced her program, the 800-gram diet, which is just 800 grams of fruit and vegetables as a diet where you can actually eat a lot of the normal stuff you eat besides that and stay healthy. She has a Master's of Science in Nutrition. She has a podcast called The Consistent Podcast that's amazing, and she has a great Instagram page where she gives out nutrition tips almost daily. There's a lot of stuff in here I want to ask her about how to live a healthy life, and I'm really excited to share it with you. Welcome, EC.
Ignition. Liftoff.
Welcome back to the Disruptors Network podcast, and we have an amazing guest today, and EC Synkowski. And EC, is that you? I saw her come up as Eva Claire, but do you prefer EC?
Yeah, I like EC a lot, or at least people
cool.
know me as that anyway. So that'll work.
Well, I've done a lot of background, and you have an amazing story. And I watched TED Talk, and just even your Instagram for people who, and we'll give it out at the end, but you definitely should follow you on Instagram just for nutrition facts you're giving out. But where did you start with nutrition, and how did you get into this whole entire world?
Yeah. My undergrad is in biochem engineering, essentially. So I did a lot of biosciences. My first master's has a genetics component to it. So I was definitely interested in the life sciences, but I would say professionally, it really didn't start till I was working for CrossFit headquarters, because of course, nutrition is a big part of their program and what they teach. So that application side really got started for me in CrossFit when I was working for them. And that led to me starting my second master's in nutrition. So I would say I started developing some practical experience with it and coaching others with it starting in 2006. But I didn't really start my business till 2017 after I finished my second master's.
Now, CrossFit's interesting, obviously, because it's definitely a special kind of nutrition for those athletes with what they're how they're burning.
Mm-hmm.
Did that take a different type of approach? Like, I mean, I'm sure different athletes take different types of approaches. And this is just a question almost off range, but we made me think of it was, with an athlete at that kind of high level of burn rate when they're working out, does it take a different type of nutrition or a different type of a strategy?
Not a full sale difference. And so I think this is one of my main messages in nutrition. I've authored these 10 principles to sort of set the framework to understand nutrition before we even start talking about any food choices or exactly what you're going to eat today. And so that's sort of my message in nutrition is let's understand some basic concepts that apply to all of us. And now we're going to go and apply that to the context of the person who might be a high level athlete versus somebody who's just starting day one at a CrossFit gym, right? So they have similar tendencies between the two people, but what the person needs at the high level ends up being a lot more volume and a lot more precision, even though there's some overlapping concepts. So I would say that the CrossFit methodology helped me learn the distinction between the two, right? Because you're going to have people coming in off the street, just getting started with their fitness, just getting started with their nutrition. We're going to scale back the level of precision and accuracy we need in our nutrition. And then we ramp that up as the athlete gets more professional and elite.
Got it. And as far as you go, did you have a athletic background or a fitness background?
Mm-hmm.
Was that what kind of pushed you into nutrition originally, or was it just a general interest?
It was probably more of a general interest. I certainly grew up playing sports. I'm from Maryland, so lacrosse was my big sport. So yeah, I always loved fitness, and it was always just a big part of my day, kind of kept, I guess, my sanity with all of the schoolwork and studies. So it was just kind of my background. Yeah.
Got it. You mentioned the principles of dieting, and I saw you spoke about it in your TED Talk a little bit. And what do you consider the principles of dieting, like the general principles of dieting when somebody comes in to speak to you for the first time? I mean, are there a few things that you give every single person, like, these are basics that you have to follow?
Yeah. I have 10 of them, and I don't actually start when somebody just says, hey, what should I do for nutrition? Right. I'm not going to be like, well, we're going to go over 10 principles and you're going to understand them all perfectly to start. They're actually part of what I call my master class for people that want more of a deeper dive.
Okay.
What I do start people with is my 800-gram challenge. And that's for people to eat 800 grams by weight of fruits and vegetables each day. And they pick the fruits and veggies, and then they continue to eat whatever else they want. So they get this 800 grams, it's about 6 cups. And then they continue to have their protein or their wine or their dark chocolate or whatever. That is what I kind of consider how to implement the principles. So I consider the principles are kind of the why. And then all these diets out there that we get confused with, are you doing paleo? Are you doing fasting? Are you doing the 800-gram challenge? these are the methods. But once you understand the principles, the methods start to make more sense.
Got it.
But that being said, like somebody who's literally just wants to get started, some quote simple tip, maybe they're not really interested in the comprehensive learning about the diet just yet. I just need to get them going on something. And so that's why I'm like, hey, let's add some fruits and veggies to the diet and let's see where that takes you. Then we can always get more specific after you have success with that. So I actually just start people, hey, let's add some fruits and veggies, not more difficult than that.
And I was going to bring that up, the 800-gram challenge, and I read, I read a lot about that you said about it. And, so it's interesting to me because I've always counted macros or something around that, or, I've tried to keep a high level of calories throughout the day, but, it was interesting. But I love sweets. I don't drink alcohol. I don't have any vices, but sweets is definitely a vice for me. But when you said, I heard in your speech, you talked about if you can eat 800 grams of fruits and veggies, you really can stick to your other routines. Is it just that it's basically just balancing it out? Like, how does that work functionally?
Yeah, you've hit it on a nail on the head there. Generally, when people eat that volume of fruits and veggies, they have to give up something else because we only have so much room in our stomach each day. So what happens is you're not told, no, don't eat the cookies or no, don't eat the candy. You still can have them, but you typically won't have as much room at the end of the day for as much of that as you want. So it's a shorthand way that we can often get quantity in line. Now, it's not foolproof. Like if you finish your fruits and veggies early in the day and then go have a pint of ice cream every night, we still have a problem. But like I said, it's kind of a basic first step to get people going. And often what they find is that they could have weight loss or just weight control because now they're filling up on these lower calorically dense items, not as much of the processed stuff that is very calorically dense and we all love.
Got it. Yeah. And it's funny. You said in your TED talk, and it really spoke to me. You said, all food is not created equal, right? Like anything that is wrapped in plastic could be a problem. And
right.
I've heard that before, if it's not from the earth or it's not from, is that something personally you try to stick to? Like anything that's processed, do you just stay away from completely?
Oh, not at all. I mean, I definitely enjoy those goodies just like everybody else does. Right. And so that's kind of some of my progression in nutrition is that before I had started my own nutrition company, I'd gotten quite obsessive with some of these rules out there in nutrition, like never eat anything processed. And you can start developing some neuroses and unhealthy habits around food because of that. Anything can be part of a healthy diet, including ice cream, including wine, including dark chocolate, including cake, whatever it is, anything can be part. The key word is part, right? And so most of our diet needs to look like whole unprocessed foods. And we tend to be overeating them. So most people, when they have to quote, clean up their diet, although I don't like that phrase, they do have to cut back on that processed food. That doesn't mean they can't have it. They just can't have as much as they would like.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And again, that's, I tend to get weaker at night like everybody else does. So if I'm full, it's easier, obviously. And, I have seen major differences when I eat more veggies and I kind of stick to that. So what you're saying makes a ton of sense to me. Some of what I've seen on your page, which I thought was really, really interesting, was that counting macros or counting calories in general, if you have some form of eating disorder, could cause that to come back almost like mentally that may be an issue. If somebody's pushing you to a diet like that, it may bring back some of the old habits that weren't so good. Can you talk about that a little bit and the dangers of that a little bit?
Yeah, the way that I try to approach nutrition, again, is this principle idea. And we're always trying to find the right tool for the right job. And I'm not trying to promote a single diet. Macros or counting calories, however you want to say it or look at it, can be wildly effective. In fact, it can be perhaps the most effective way that we can control the diet to the greatest precision to get the outcome we want. And for that reason, I love it. And I think for people that want to undertake it, the work will pay off. But we also have to understand that nutrition has a large psychological component. And if you're somebody who comes from an eating disorder background or disordered eating, wherever we are on that scale, it tends to bring those tendencies back. And so when I have worked with eating disorder clients before, no, we don't count macros, right? Because they're already coming from this psychological context of their whole thing about their diet was too much control, right? I don't need to give them all that level of control back. And so things like my 800-gram challenge, and then the second step where people add protein, which I've dubbed lazy macros, we just focus on adding foods to the diet. We're not focusing on total calories or quantity, are generally going to be more effective for people coming from that context. But everybody has a different context, right? Everybody has the different, both physiological needs as well as the psychological needs. And we have to think about all of that to then determine, okay, what's going to be the best tool or right tool for the right job.
So I got it. Yeah. I mean, that totally makes sense. And, and you said this about women also. And I'm sure it applies to men in a lot of ways too, that as we age, we need less calories, right? Like our body needs less calories, organs, same thing as our organs, the capacity gets less and less and less, and we need less calories.
Yeah.
So, and I think I hear this all the time, right? The diet, I've done this diet my whole life and I just got to do this diet and I get back in shape. And when that diet stops working or the same things stop working, I think people get very, very frustrated because the same things that worked when we were 25 may not work at 35 and 45 and 55.
Totally.
Can you just talk a little bit about the science behind that?
Yeah. Yeah. One of my friends, she actually owns a CrossFit gym out in Boulder, CrossFit Roots. And she said it really well. Unlike other aspects of our life that get better or easier with experience and age, nutrition is not one of them.
That's great.
And it is really true. We actually have to get tighter over time. There was a really big study that came out quite recently. And it kind of, I don't want to say put a nail in the coffin, but there's so much talk about hormonal changes and all of this stuff as we age. And they pretty much were like, per gram of lean tissue, that doesn't really become an issue till 60, 65 plus. So what we do find though, is as people age, they tend to lose muscle mass. And there's a little bit of, is it just because we become less active, or it's literally the aging process that's eating away at the muscle mass? Like, is it just because once we get 40 plus, we're not as energized to go out for that workout? We don't push ourselves as hard? Or is it because we don't have the same max heart rate, same whatever capacity to continue to push as hard? So I have a feeling there's going to be competing drivers there, and they're both feeding into this problem. But what we do find is that people tend to lose muscle mass as they age, and therefore they're burning less calories throughout the day. And they're also not pushing as hard when they work out because they don't have the same amount of capacity, right? And so ultimately this results in needing less calories as we age. And so this is why weight gain, especially in our society where there's so much processed goodies everywhere, is so commonplace. And especially for women who enter this aging process, typically they're smaller bodies. I'm of course 6 feet tall, so it's a little bit different for me, but typically they're smaller bodies and they typically have less muscle mass than men. So their pool starts at a lower number. And therefore, as they age, that diet gets even tighter. And so they typically, once they're late 40s into 50s, their caloric budget is quite tight. And if you want to squeeze in a glass of wine or whatever the snack is of choice that day, it gets harder and harder. Men typically have just a little bit more flex. So although they have the same issue going on, they just start at a higher number. And so they can tend to fit in a few more fun things to stay sane.
That's interesting. I mean, that's really interesting because I think that people, I've never even, until I listened to you say, and I'm into fitness my whole life, I never even thought of that, to be totally honest with you, like that our bodies need less. And, is there a way to almost like, so a big problem I've seen now, as I've gotten older is more inflammation, right? Like, soreness and inflammation. And is there something that you recommend to people to counteract that? Because I feel like with age, if you do want to stay at a high level, I think that's a lot of the problems I run into sometimes, either soreness or inflammation or something like that. Is there stuff that nutritionally that we can use to fight that?
Yeah, it's actually the same things I recommend for people who are young. It just turns out that you tend to see the benefits of that when you're older. So the 800 grams of fruits and vegetables, you end up getting a lot of vitamins and minerals, as well as those phytochemicals people always know about, like resveratrol in red wine. That's how, red wine is considered healthy, all that stuff. But these phytochemicals, there's thousands of them, and they have anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties, as well as some of our vitamins and minerals. And what we find is a lot of people on average, like over 80% of people in the US are not getting enough fruits and veggies. So one of the things that people find when they start something like the 800 gram challenge is, wow, I feel like my aches and pains are going away. I feel like I have more energy. I have better recovery. It's like, yeah, we're probably now at the normal level. And it turns out that youth can mask some of that. But as we age, we tend to feel our diet a little bit more. And then of course, the second step where I mentioned add protein, that's going to be huge for recovery as well. And I would say on average, most people are not eating enough fruits and vegetables and not getting enough protein. And so as we age and we need those components even more, it just becomes like even more clear that we need to be really consistent with that. Not that we need to change our plan. We just don't have as much flexibility as we did when we were 20.
Yeah, and you're right. You're 100% right. That becomes the stiffness becomes the biggest problem.
Right.
So the other thing I saw that you had kind of put that, we kind of get stuck on either I have to eat a gram of protein for every pound that I weigh, or I have to drink a certain amount of water every single day. Mm-hmm. Is there stuff that you recommend in your diet that's like that? Or do you think that do you think it's crazy to put a number on that? Like I'm 150 pounds. I have to eat 150 grams of protein every single day. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I love metrics. And that's something actually that I really like about CrossFit. And look, you can get fit in many ways that aren't CrossFit, but one of the things that they do is, hey, we got to take data so that we know if we're progressing. And so that's one of the things about the 800-gram challenge is you could say, I'm going to eat more fruits and veggies. I'm just going to clean up my diet and quote, eat more. Well, what the heck does more mean? And how do you hold yourself to that standard every day? I have to have a number, and 800 is not the perfect number, but it's certainly better than no number, right? And so the same thing is going to be true with protein. The number I put out there for most people as a starting point is 0.7 grams per pound of body weight. But I do recommend up to 1 gram per pound, especially for people who want to put on noticeable mass or doing a lot of lifting volume. But that's just it. Without some sort of metric, how do we know if we're actually hitting it? People think they know their diet, but I can tell you, until you actually track and look and take some data on your diet, it's very subjective and it's very variable. That's something else people think that they're, oh, I'm so consistent on my diet. That's what I take people through in my masterclass, and they learn quite quickly, holy cats, I had no idea that this was what my diet looked like in terms of actual metrics. So I do like metrics. I mean, that's ultimately why macros and calories are so effective. We're controlling the variables that matter instead of sort of having this perceived idea about what we think our diet is in terms of quality or quantity.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times we're going in the wrong direction. I think that's a really, really good point. I think even for me, I'm Italian. I grew up in an Italian household. And what my mother told me was good to eat, when I learned later in life that may not have been so healthy, right?
Yeah.
Even to this day, like my kids will go over the house and she's like, my stomach was bothering me. She gave me ginger ale. She said that settles the stomach. I'm like, there's 100 grams of sugar in that. I don't know, that settled like your stomach, you know? So I think that, some of it is disproving some of the stuff that we've learned over time. And for me, a big eye opener is when I took an allergy test, essentially a food I was allergic to, or I had a sensitivity to. Do you suggest, because that was really eye-opening for me, because then a lot of the stuff started to make sense. Like I have a sensitivity to steak, and I always was eating steak before races or big workouts. And I didn't realize how sluggish I actually was until I looked at the test and I was like, oh, wow, that's why I feel like that. Do you suggest people do that, as far as even, that's kind of a metric in itself, right? Like find out what your body can't take before you start a diet?
Yeah, unfortunately, and I don't know exactly which test you had, but even if it's like the ALCAT one, or even if it's the IgG ones, unfortunately, the science is a little shaky on them.
Got it. Yeah.
That there's some direct to consumer tests that don't really have a lot of evidence behind them. And I think some of the feelings that people experience are actually more of a placebo, because they're told, don't eat this, you will feel bad, and therefore you cut it out and therefore you feel better. And placebo effect is very real and very, very powerful. And it can be quite awesome because it can work for us in good ways, but we also can develop neuroses. And so some of these tests that are telling people don't eat raspberries, I'm like, that is the last thing we need to be telling people, to stay away from all of these healthy foods. So the science really isn't there on a lot of this food sensitivity stuff. In fact, a lot of times what happens is you will show positive in quotes, or don't eat something for foods that you eat a lot of, in part because we have immune responses to the foods that we eat that are developing to what's called tolerance. It's basically, as we're all experiencing with the thing, like once you develop tolerance to right, you have antibodies to them. And so if we're picking up antibodies to steak, it might just be because we have a tolerance to steak, not because we actually have an adverse reaction to it.
Really good
so
point.
I think some of the lab tests in the direct to consumer realm have jumped the gun a little bit on what we can say. And so I don't actually recommend them.
Yeah, so it's really just, how do you feel when you eat something more than anything else?
It's tough. The feeling one, it's really hard for me to get on board with that, because feelings are so mercurial and so fleeting. And, do you feel bad 2 hours after a steak because you just got an annoying email from your boss, or you got some bad news, or is it really because of the steak? I think we've put a lot of, and this is also coming from my experience over these years, developing neuroses and then looking at the science and like, wow, this was all junk science. I think we put a lot of emotions and expectations in food. Or even it's like the lull after lunch. People are like, oh, I felt bad a couple hours after lunch. It's like, yes, not all moments of the day are we mentally firing like we're going to chew through concrete. Like sometimes we have mental lulls or just fatigue or whatever it is from other things. And so I really hesitate feeling as a good metric. Now, of course, I have to just delineate, like, there are things you have to listen to, true debilitating diseases or symptoms that are constantly plaguing, please, of course, go see a doctor.
No, it's a really good point. And the placebo effect, you're right. That is a really good point, because you could be telling ourselves something all the time, like, oh, I have that lull after lunch or whatever it is. And you start to believe it. It starts to become a habit almost.
There was this really interesting study they were looking. So I'm sure you know about gluten, and there are people that truly should avoid gluten, gluten intolerance, celiac disease, but there are also people who have non-gluten or gluten sensitivity, but they don't have celiac. And they haven't come up with a good way to diagnose it yet, because there's no good marker to really identify these individuals. But they do blind tests for people. And some people think they have gluten sensitivity. And when they blind test them, they don't have a response. And then when they tell them they're about to eat gluten and it's not gluten, they have a response.
Idiot.
And so it's amazing what we can psychologically convince ourselves of. And we just have to be careful of that, especially when we're doing this self-experimentation. I'm all for it. Like, if you want to cut out steak and you think you feel better and you are feeling better or whatever it is, like, I'm fine with that. From a nutrition,
right?
yeah, it's just sort of like, we can't all wait till there's, double-blind placebo-controlled trials and everything under the sun for us to figure out our own stuff. But from a nutrition perspective, I can't recommend, no, we should all do these food sensitivity tests or whatever, and everybody should stop eating steak, because the evidence is just not there.
That's really good other side to it. There's always two sides to things, and I'm kind of like you in a lot of ways, that I like stats and I like metrics and I like to look at stuff to kind of, and I'm always trying to improve. But I think the truth of the matter is if I looked at all the other stuff I was eating around the steak or stuff like that, there probably would be something to that as well. You know what I mean? And
Totally.
when you were dealing with CrossFit athletes, again, another high level of athlete, do you feel like there was certain things you had to be dialed in on as far as for top performance, right? When they were going to something that was going to be a competition or something like that, was there stuff that you had to be dialed in on to get to help people with top performance?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, top performance will only come through nutrition if we are taking data on our nutrition. So, a lot of these top athletes weigh and measure their food in part so they can know what's working and what to change. It's really easy to think, oh, I need more protein. Well, how much you're eating, I have no idea. So I think first step one for a top athlete, we have to assess our diet, what we're currently eating in terms of macros and calories, and then we start making changes from there and see if it pays off with performance. So that would be one thing, is just getting a tighter control of the inputs to make sure how is it related to the outputs. I think that there's another issue that's kind of wider spread in the greater CrossFit community, and that is this low carb dogma. And high intensity training requires carbohydrates. So having a diet that's at least 40% carbohydrates might swing higher depending on the level of the athlete and how much volume they're doing. Some of our elite athletes are going to be 50%, 60% plus carbs. There's been this low carb push, and people think that that's going to fuel elite performance. Not for anything at high intensity. And so sometimes with those athletes, it's convincing them, yes, like, let's eat some rice and potatoes and bananas.
Yeah. And it's funny because I've watched the documentaries on the games and stuff like that. It's, they kind of eat whatever they want in between a lot of those guys, because you burn so much that I guess you can really go for it at that point to refill your body.
And that's what's so hard talking to people, like, when they see the top CrossFit Games athletes, because they're like, well, so-and-so eats this and it works for them. And it's like, well, so-and-so needs 7,000 calories a day. I don't know if you remember, there was some backlash about Michael Phelps's diet. And I think he ate, 8 to 12,000 calories, some huge number,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
And everybody remembers this because he could eat like pizza all the time. It's like, you do not fuel 8,000 calories on broccoli. Like, you don't have enough time in the day to chew through that volume of broccoli. Like, how are you going to get to 8,000 calories? You eat all of these calorically dense foods, which most of us, because our budgets are so much less, we might only get a slice of pizza, where the Michael Phelps level can have the pizza plus, right? And so this is what's really hard. One of the things I love about high level athletes is people see the hard work and like, yes, copy the hard work. Do not copy their diet, because that doesn't apply to you right now.
Because everybody's unique, right? That's it's really just finding out what works for people, right? Because 8,000 calories sounds completely insane, but I guess for his work rate, it wasn't really.
Correct.
that crazy.
Yeah, he's such a, what is he, 6'6" or something like
Yeah,
that?
he's big,
Very
yeah.
tall,
Yeah.
muscular, and then he's swimming, several hours a day. There's no way you're going to do that on bell pepper, like, boiled chicken and broccoli. Like, we're just not getting there. Even if he were to sit down and try to do it, I don't think he could actually physically get through all the chewing outside of his hours of training.
And as you say that, like, I think what I run into a lot when I'm talking to people about health or whatever their diets are, I think a lot of what I run into is people are at a calorie deficit a lot of the time, that they're not eating enough. I mean, do you find that to be a bigger problem than anything else, that people are just not taking in enough food?
For higher level athletes, yes. For people training once a day, no. So for our high level athletes, there's very much this logistical issue. So we got to sleep some part during the day, and then they typically are doing 2 multiple sessions a day, and then they have these high caloric demands. So when the heck are they going to eat all these calories? That's a problem. And so typically for our high level athletes, it often ends up being, we need you to eat more. For people training once a day, no. What will often happen though is I guess it could be men too. I classically see it a little bit more with women, is they might undereat, let's say on Monday to Friday. And then gosh, by Saturday, they're so sick of the diet and they're so hungry that we say, oh, heck with the diet on Saturday and Sunday, we overeat. And we end up erasing that caloric deficit that we had all week. And we're right back where we started on Monday. And this cycle can even happen in just one day too. Like, you don't eat all day at the office. You have just that, 1 chicken breast on some plain salad, and then you go home and you eat everything in sight. But it's this idea where we go through these 2 restrictive phases to then overeat. We never actually make any net progress, I think, is more of the issue than true undereating for people.
I think you 100% just hit it on the head, especially even for me sometimes, whereas I'm busy during the day and I'm trying to stick to it, but I can't. And then I get home and I'm starving. And then, and I'll say to people, like, I have small kids, like they're 8 and 6. But on the weekends I'm running around, like I'll pick up 3-4 pounds in a weekend sometimes, because I'm just not concentrated on what I'm eating, and I'm eating whatever I want. So I think you're right. And then the net gain is nothing at the end of the day. Like, I work Monday to Friday to get back to where I was before that you erase it if you don't work on the weekends, you erase it.
Well, and think about it too, like, especially someone who's being very kind of restrictive during the week, they're hungry. They've spent 5 days now of adhering to this schedule. By Saturday, you feel like you've earned it. And unfortunately, our weight doesn't work in terms of hours of adherence. It works based on calories.
Right.
So it's very mentally frustrating, because you can do 5 days that are quote perfect and undo it in 3 hours. Even though there's way more hours on the perfect side, the caloric balance ends up probably being a net neutral.
That's a gem. That's a hard truth, but it's really, really accurate. It's so accurate. I think that's what everybody sees, like, oh, I'm going out Friday and I'm going to have a few drinks, and a few drinks turns into a few more. And I was like, and that becomes a problem, because you just erased everything you did for 5 days. And then I think people get frustrated and they quit. Right. And then it just goes back to the habit the other way. And
sorry, I was going to say restaurant food is people have no idea how many calories. There are salads out there that are 1,500 calories. It's people think, oh, I just had a bite. You don't have to be going out and eating a whole 12 dozen donuts to have a lot of calories. It's amazing how fast, especially in restaurant food, largely because of a lot of fat. That's why it tastes so good, through sauces, through just the cuts of meat they use, just portion size. It's amazing what restaurant food will do compared to what you would prepare at home. And so you don't have to just be this, gorged on a whole cake to have eaten way, way too many calories.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I think that when somebody goes and they see salad or something that seems healthy, it's not really that healthy.
Not always,
and
no.
You can always taste it too. I was talking to one of the guys that I work with yesterday, and we ate something, and I was like, "This is supposed to be healthy," but you could taste the sugar in it. Like, you literally could taste the sugar in it, and that becomes a big thing. How much do you buy into? What I think I've realized more recently, and is that I'm dehydrated a lot, more than I should be. And I work out daily, and I'm trying to be better about my water intake. How important is that in a diet, as far as how much water you're taking in a day and how you feel in your body that way?
Yeah, I think it is important. I think it's probably where I need to focus the next most amount. I'm not the biggest water drinker. But I do think it helps people feel better. I think mentally it helps you feel better, also helps you, obviously work out better. And then you stay a little bit more full as well.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
yeah, I mean, it's just, there's so many things. Water, of course, is essential. I do think people get a little bit crazy with it. You'll see like, oh, I have to finish these 2 gallons today. And it's just like, do you, like, are you working out that volume? So, just having your urine stay a pale yellow, doesn't have to be clear, is a great guide. And for people that aren't super active, I mean, active, but not like, sweating through multiple t-shirts every day at their workout, half of your body weight in ounces is okay guide. So if I'm 180, so like 90 ounces of water a day is an okay guide to start. And then you're going to have to scale up and down kind of based off of the urine color a little bit and just activity.
I'm with you on that. That's where I try to stay. I try to stay about 50% of my body weight.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's harder than other days, but it's crazy because you don't think of it and you go and you really are dehydrated. And I can start to tell it with either dryness in skin or just how I feel, and you start to see it, but it's become really important for me. So I have a couple of random questions for you that are different than,
great.
What do you think has brought you to where you are today? Like, what do you think has made you to what you're in today? What would you give as one key point to what brought you to today?
It probably isn't one key point. I actually feel often like this is a great kind of culmination of kind of some of my past. And so it's kind of cool to see it now being applied this way. But if I could kind of pull out just a couple things from that. So I try to answer your question in the format you wanted. My undergrad's in engineering. I think I bring a really systems approach, looking at the big picture. Does this thing actually work? Which is what you need in an engineer. And I bring that approach to nutrition. And then I have kind of the CrossFit side, which yes, has some science background, but again, it was very focused on kind of end results. Like, are you getting better? Let's track the data. And so I think that has really led into kind of where I am now with nutrition and trying to have people focus on outcomes and trying to take the big picture approach.
That's awesome. That's good. That's a good answer. You got there.
I got there.
If you had to start over from zero, right? If you're starting over from again, and so I think about this a lot sometimes. Like if I was starting today with the knowledge I have, but I was starting over again, what do you think you would change paths? Do you think it would be the same path? Where do you think you would go if you had to start from zero again?
Generally, I think I like my path a lot. I didn't mention it, but I did work in environmental consulting with the engineering stuff for a while, and I just liked all of that as well. I think I would tweak a little bit how I started my current business. So the entrepreneur part of it, I pretty much leaped before testing out the business model. So I wouldn't recommend that. So I actually started my company planning to do some one-on-one consulting and learned quite quickly that that was not my strength, nor did I want to continue. And so I ended up, even though I've had my company for 4 years, at least 1.5 years of that was looking for work after I'd started it. And then I kind of realized 1.5 years in of what to do with it. So I would encourage people to not only think about your business model, but try it, test it before you make the leap. Yeah.
I think I love that point. And I think 2 things I have to say about that is that at some point you have to rip the Band-Aid off and just do it, or because if you don't commit, that it'll never happen. But at the same time, you're right. Like, ideas sound great until you get into it. Like if you talk to anybody, talk to a gym owner and be like, I'm going to get into the gym business. I think they'd be like, hold on a second. There's all these issues, right? So
there's so many ways now, especially where careers allow for side hustles, or there's so many ways to get your feet wet now that I think maybe even 20 years ago weren't options, that I just think jumping before really testing is the last resort. Yeah. Don't do it.
And you're in a field that's, constantly, as time goes on, it gets more and more focused on it. There's a million people who are doing something health related or fitness related. What do you do to separate yourself? And that, it's in a field that may be crowded.
Yeah, it is crowded, for sure. I think it's like a $66 billion industry. I think the way that I distinguish myself is kind of being quite vanilla. My message is to eat fruits and vegetables, to add some protein and not eat too much. And yet, there's all these different diets that are like, now I found this new special secret new way. And I'm like, no, we're going back to basics and doing the tried and true that we know works. And so I distinguish myself because I like not that distinguishing. Right. And I think people in some ways find it a little bit refreshing. They've been through all these other mazes of things that are the fix, the one, the new thing. And they're like, okay, those aren't working. Right. So that's how I try to distinguish myself.
I think that's good also, because I think it's a lot of disappointment when you go to like, this is it. Like, there is no there's no magic bullet, really. It's so I think it's good. I like that. What would you tell somebody that was 18 years old, looking to go down the same path you went down? Like, what piece of advice would you give them?
Yeah. One of the things that I think has really helped me in nutrition and I do continue to this day is working with people. Yes, I have the degrees. Yes, I have the credentials, but working with clients, it's great. You can come up with the most theoretical best idea. Okay, let me hear how many clients stuck with it. And I think that's where we have a lot of the lack of translation between, quote, some of the science and then real life. And it's why kind of my tagline is nutrition with a reality check. Like, okay, cool. You have the best idea ever. How many people sign up? How many people like it? Because there's a big gap there. And so I really like working with people still and kind of some of the products that I do, because that's where I get to test out, like, how good am I? How good are these ideas? Do they work?
Yeah, that's great. I think it's great that you're constantly challenging yourself almost to, like, is this stuff I'm really talking about work? Like, you walk in with a background and I think people have some kind of expectation of you, but if you're not continuously improving, then it's not, what are you really doing? So I think that's awesome.
Correct.
Well, you've been amazing. I got a lot of personal information out of it. So I thank
cool.
you. What's the best way for people to connect with you and kind of, if they want to throw things at you and ask you questions, what's the best way to connect?
Yeah, pretty easy. OptimizeMeNutrition.com. It's the website, same handle on Facebook and Instagram, Optimize Me Nutrition. And then my podcast is The Consistency Project.
Awesome. Well, I learned a lot today, and I think your social media is great too. So people should definitely check out your Instagram as well, because I like when you answer questions on there. I actually just kind of went through your videos and I got a lot out of that. So people should definitely check that out. But thank you for coming on. We really, really appreciate it. And we hope to see more from you.
Yes. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, EC.
What a great podcast that was with EC today. She gave me a lot of facts that I'm using for myself, including why we need less calories as we get older, for men and for women. She spoke about women for men also, and also how some of these nutrition things that we're being told as far as what we're allergic to or what we shouldn't be eating aren't true, and really how we can live a healthy lifestyle pretty easily. I hope you enjoyed the show. You definitely should check out our podcast and her Instagram and all her social media. It's called The Consistency Podcast if you're looking for it. And our podcast, the Disruptors Network, is available on all platforms, including Apple and Stitcher and Spotify. So check it out, and we'll see you next time.